Can you spot the difference between the real Virtual Boy and the fake one for Nintendo Switch? I thought I could until I spent 15 seconds trying to open the wrong one. It was actually this one in order to insert my Nintendo Switch into it. So hey everyone, Andre here, and I've been spending a lot of time sticking my face into both these Virtual Boys in order to discern the difference and similarities between them and how accurate the new one is to the original. Now before we get to it, I want to stress, I think it's freaking awesome this exists at all. The fact they made a replica of a not so great device just to allow us to experience a library that most missed back in the day, I think that's actually really cool. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and get to my overall breakdown of how I think the new one holds up, both in terms of playing the games, how the games look in the headset itself, along with any differences or changes in the hardware exterior too, which we're actually starting with right now. And just look at these two beautiful boys, Virtual Boys that is. And even to a hardcore fan like myself, they can be hard to tell apart, but for clarity's sake, the new one for Switch is on the left, the original hardware is on the right. They'd be easier to tell apart if I had the Switch plugged in, as it would stick out toward the bottom, but I wanted to keep it as clean as possible for now, so you can see how similar they really appear. It is remarkable, right down to recreating the original levers and knobs from the original system. But in this case, they don't do anything. You can't actually move them. They have no use on the final product, whereas in the original, they would affect the focus as well as the IPD. Oh, that sounded painful. It's okay, Virtual Boy, I know you're 30 years old. In any case, there are some other subtle tells that gives it away. From appearance sake, though, again, they are very similar overall, especially from the back. But I do want to point out that the actual feel of the plastic feels a bit different. This one feels maybe a little cheaper, a bit more hollow, whereas this one actually feels pretty solid. So it's hard to tell how much of a difference there actually is. It reminds me of some of the NSO controllers, how they feel just a little cheaper compared to the originals. I could be wrong on whether it's actually cheaper or not. They just feel a little bit different. The actual rubber part on the side, though, feels identical, which is, I love that. That feels so freaking good. I'm just gonna rub that all day. All right, maybe I shouldn't. It's turning into an R-rated stream soon enough. Anyway, so they got the rubber texture right. They got the overall appearance right, but there are more differences when it comes to the actual visor part itself, because if you take a look, you may have already seen a few of the differences yourself. For one, the one in the new one is actually a little bit taller compared to the original. Furthermore, it doesn't quite fully wrap around the screen like the original one does, where it ends only at the nose gap, which also is a little bit bigger on the original and more narrow on the left, or on the new one, which results in, at least for me, the new one being a little bit more uncomfortable compared to the original. Whereas my nose fitting comfortably here, I do have a big nose, I actually run up against a plastic here. Furthermore, the foam light shield here doesn't quite fully encompass the bottom of it like the original did, which means when you're using this, it actually does let in some light from underneath. You can actually kind of see the real world, which makes this one a little bit less immersive than the original. Now, looking at the stand itself, it is practically identical to the original in most ways, even right down to the metallic feel and the Nintendo branded logo on the front. And even the clasp system is practically identical, to the point that you can actually use the new clasp or the new stand on the old one, on the old Virtual Boy, and the old Virtual Boy on the new stand if you want. Point is, either stand will work in either system. But you may have noticed that the actual clasp part, the one where the head connects to the legs itself, looks a little different in that this one has like ridges, whereas the original's totally smooth and has a kind of a cleaner look to it. I actually prefer how this one looks, but you know, not really a big deal anyway, not really looking there. But also, even the mechanism to change the angle of the Virtual Boy headset is identical as well, as you can see. So again, remarkably similar. But another difference you might have noticed is on the original, the headset portion itself comes down a bit lower, whereas it cuts short here, which kind of makes sense because you have the Switch itself extending down below here. And you also have that repair phone number on the original too, which I think still works, I'm pretty sure. Now here's one of my favorite things. No, not Nestor's Funky Bowling, but what's on it. Because as I pointed out before, although the knobs and dials do not work on the new one, there is a secret feature up here that most people don't even know about that's still functional. And it was on the original one as well, of course. And that is the fact that, do you see those two ridges there? Well, check this out. On Nestor's Funky Bowling, I've got this little card cover here, which if we remove, we can actually slide it right on there, and it acts as a holder. Also, gives it a unibrow, which is hilarious. So yeah, I had no idea about this until recently, and that kind of blew my mind. So yeah, if you want to give your Virtual Boy a unibrow and have an original cartridge, you still can, which is pretty freaking cool. Now, speaking of cartridges, we can see that the cartridge slot from the original is still there on the new model too. Now, you can't stick anything into it because there's a plastic shield there, but they actually kept it, along with the fact that you can still find the power/controller port, the unused extension port that was intended for multiplayer was never used, along with the headphone port and volume controls, which of course doesn't actually do anything. You can't turn it at all. So yeah, it's remarkably faithful to the original, but there are still some differences, such as you might have noticed that the Nintendo brand here, or more accurately where it is, Let me get it in focus here. It angles out a bit sooner now, whereas on the original, it's actually flat, and that is for both sides of this, which I found interesting. You can also see the screws themselves are a little bit different here, whereas they're black on the new ones as opposed to silver, and there's a few other subtle differences, but I'm still impressed with how accurate this is overall compared to the original. Now let's talk about the games themselves, or more accurately, how they look, play, and sound on both pieces of hardware. And I have to say, at first playthrough, this felt remarkably accurate to me on Nintendo Switch. It was exactly as I remembered. But then I went back to the original hardware, and it's a little different. That being said, I still hold true to this being the best way to play Virtual Boy games, outside of owning the original hardware, and maybe even then, we'll get to that. But first off, let's talk about the look itself. And this straight up captures that original red on black feel. It is immersive in the sense that it feels like a Virtual Boy. But going between the two displays did tell me a few things. First up, by default in the new one, the screen is way too big. It's actually much smaller on the original Virtual Boy, whereas here, it felt massive, in particular with a Switch 2. A normal Switch may be a little bit smaller by default, but either way, it is a lot bigger than the original device. However, you can use the in-game options or in-app options to shrink the display, and I found around 0.0 or 0.5 to be around the perfect size if you wanted to match original display. That being said, I don't mind the bigger screen. You can make it even go bigger if you want, and I actually think that makes it a little bit more playable in that sense. It's easier to see and appreciate the depth a little bit more. So that's not a bad difference, and again, you can control the size. That also being said, I keep saying that a lot, I will say that the new display, it looks clear, but when shrinking it or changing the size, it didn't feel quite as clear as the original display. That could be because you're messing around with the pixels and how it's being interpreted, and that, whereas the original Virtual Boy didn't do that at all. It was displaying it 1-to-1, of course. Which, fun fact, the original Virtual Boy display is literally a single column of pixels with a mirror that oscillates rapidly at 60 frames per second to make it look like a much wider display. Absolutely crazy. In any case, it still looks good, but the clarity isn't quite as sharp. At least, again, especially when you're changing the screen size. Also, the color of red feels accurate at first, but going back, it feels a little bit deeper in the original. I don't know what the exact difference is. Maybe it's due to the screen quality or how the screens even work, but it did feel like just a little bit deeper here. Furthermore, as I noted in the prior segment, because the visor doesn't fully enclose the bottom as the original did, that does allow some light to get in, which not only can make it so the black levels don't seem quite as deep, it can also cause some weird reflections around the edges, which didn't happen with the original, which makes it just a little bit less immersive. Now let's talk about sound, and that's one area where the original Virtual Boy absolutely blows away the new one for a few reasons that aren't entirely fair. Because of course the new version relies on the Switch 2's or Switch's built-in speakers, which are of course at the bottom of the Switch itself, meaning it's not right next to your ear. Unlike on the original Virtual Boy, where the speakers are right here, right next to your ears, and they are loud. They're crisp, they're loud, and they're literally in your face or in your ears, meaning you get that very clear stereo separation. And did I mention it's loud? Seriously, red alarm is almost deafening at full volume. Whereas on the Switch version, because they're recessed into the Switch itself and behind where your ears actually are, you don't get that clean separation, and it sounds not muffled, but not as loud and in your face.
Welcome to Snake's World. Let's go. Welcome to Snake's World. Let's go.
Also, the sound quality is a little bit different just by the nature of the speakers and their quality. I couldn't tell you which one is actually better quality. I will say, though, they do sound different. And, as one who's grown up with the original Virtual Boy, I did appreciate how the original sounded by comparison to the new one. But again, it's something you're only going to notice if you actually have an original piece of hardware to compare it to. And regardless of which device you use, you can even plug in headphones too. Though on the Switch version, you'll of course have to pop open the top and keep it open in order to plug your headset into the top of your Nintendo Switch. Finally, let's talk about the games themselves, or more accurately, how accurate the emulation actually is. And I have to say, it seems spot on. I didn't notice any weird artifacts or sound issues at all. They felt and played exactly as I remembered, outside of the minor, hardware issues I noted earlier, and again, by issues, I mean just differences. But otherwise, the emulation felt perfect, except for one small area, kind of small, and that is there is a small amount of latency when it comes to playing any of these games. Now, that's not uncommon for emulation or NSO in particular, but I did notice it compared to the original original hardware, where if you hit a button, it responded instantly, whereas in the new one, there is a slight delay. Again, not a huge deal, but it's something to be noted there. Outside of that, the games otherwise felt identical, except for the fact that it doesn't come with a Virtual Boy controller, which is unfortunate considering this is a pretty unique controller by having 2 D-pads. But I made a whole video already talking about this, in which the N64 NSO controller is actually a near perfect replacement. Go give that video a watch if you want more details about that. Finally, one big advantage of playing on the new Switch version is that you get access to all the typical emulator features. Things like save states and rewind, which is really useful as some of these games are pretty tough, like Red Alarm here. I never beat it originally, but now I feel like I can on the Nintendo Switch version. Oh, and just to reiterate a point from my previous segment, I still have to say that the original Virtual Boy is more comfortable thanks to the wider nose gap and the fact that my nose didn't run into actual plastic like on the new one. So again, for comfort, this one wins by a slight hair. Woo! So there you go, everyone. My overall thoughts and impressions of the new Virtual Boy versus the old one. What did you think? Did anything surprise you here? Or if you had the chance to try the original, any other differences you noticed or any disagreements you have with me? Let me know in the comments below. And with that, thanks for watching. Click subscribe if you haven't already, and we'll catch you later. Bye, everyone.